The work that we want to do today is to talk about, in the morning anyway, to lay down some of a background of some of the research and the work that we've done over the past 6 or 7 years to kind of gather together what we call this, the material behind this orientation shift. The idea being that there is a number of different change threads going on in the world, in business, in health, in individual well-being in general. And by business, I mean organizational science, the cutting edge of it. In educational research, in family studies, in virtually all areas that talk about how well human beings perform, how well human beings move into being more healthy. And they all cut down to the same basic point. And that's the point we want to get at today, which is what we call towards a learning-oriented subjectivity. How is it, again, like I said earlier, how is it that somebody becomes awake, alive, and self-instrumenting of their entire range or capacities for learning? And what is a more central and appropriate mission of education than to do that? Towards that end, one of the things that we've really come to in terms of the concept of this overall vision is that there's 5 pieces to it. One is that there's a shift going on in the world. And the major shift that's going on in the world we characterize as a shift from an orientation towards producing knowers towards an orientation of stewarding and facilitating learners. It's very, very simple in language to say, well, knowers and learners. But it's very, very deep and profound. What I want to say is that, as Cliff had mentioned, as the world continues through this process of greater and greater rates of change, the only thing that's relevant in terms of what we can prepare human beings to be ready for, to deal with that change, is their capacities for learning. In the past, the rate of change was sufficiently slow, you might say, that we could train people with particular skills and particular competencies and a particular body of knowledge that was sufficient to go out into the world and with that body of knowledge, engage the world and be successful. Over the past 20 or 30 years, that's really eroded. For hundreds of years, whether it was in agriculture or early ages industry, the nature of business, what the world needed from its, quote, human resources, as they're called today, was an ability to repeat and very predictably certain things that they had learned. This is no longer true. It's no longer true, certainly in the cutting edge of what's going on in the world, and I don't think it's actually true in any part of the world. That what's happening is the rate of change and the information age is really combining to create a demand for learners which hasn't existed before. What I mean by that is that if you go out, and I'm going to talk about this in a few minutes in more detail, if you go and talk to the major universities and businesses and organizations around the world that are really deeply asking the question, what is it that we need from our human capital, which is, they're starting to use that phrase, which is kind of frightening. What is it we need from people? The number one answer is their capacities for learning, not what they have learned. What they have learned is only a scaffold from which to move. It is not in itself. It is necessary but insufficient. In the next 5 or 10 years, I think we're going to see is that the main aptitude test for becoming an employee in a major organization is going to be connected to how well somebody's capacities for learning are alive, how well somebody's participating, able to ongoingly learn. That's a major shift in the way that the world works. One of the things we're going to do this afternoon is take a look at how that's experienced in each of us. Because for the most part, we here, this guy here, is knower-oriented. In other words, as I start to talk, as I start to do various things, I plug into this I know attitude. I start to say things as if that's the way it is. I know. And what we're going to discover later on as we go through it is that when somebody has that attitude, that I know, they can't learn. That I know is kind of the end. It's the end orientation of learning. There is a need for I know. There is a need for being able to bring knowledge to bear. But the minute it loses its provisionality, its ability to be flexible and dynamic, and the scaffolding from which to learn, then learning's over. I know is a disinvitation to learn. So what this means is that as we start to see the need for an education system that's producing what we'll call learners for a moment, then there's a major shift that has to occur in the whole process of education. That whereas in the past, you might say, we have looked at learning as a utility or means, the capacity for learning was the process through which students acquire knowledge, skills, and experience. One of the things that we're saying now is that that's 180 degrees out of phase. That what we need to do is to look at knowledge, skills, and experience as a means to exercise somebody's capacities for learning. It's very simple little inversion, but it's if you see the necessity, we're going to come back to this and go into it in greater detail. If you see the necessity of developing developing learners, people whose capacities for learning are awake and whose participation in those capacities is the main concern, then you have to get capacity oriented. And when you do, then there's this orientation shift we just discussed, I just talked about.